Okay. Hi, everyone. All right, Stephen, I just want to double check. Am I in the green room or am I outside the green room? Because
you're live.
Okay, I'm live. Hey, everybody, I'm live. Good afternoon. I am Rivka Sass, and I'm director of Sacramento Public Library, and I really want to welcome you to this incredibly special event. We're so excited that you've joined us for Authors Uncovered, and for once again, Donna Apidone, amazing host at Capital Public Radio, who is going to be interviewing one of my favorite people in the entire world and the world's most famous librarian, bar none. And I left my action figure at work. So, yay, Nancy! Tip it down a little bit. There's a little bit of glare. There we go. Nancy Pearl, the only librarian with her very own action figure, is joining us tonight. Nancy's a best-selling author, librarian, and literary critic. But first and foremost, she's a reader. And she has spent her life reading and promoting books as, I believe, a public health issue. Reading is a public health issue. And Nancy has taken care of that for us to make sure that we all read and enjoy it. She's, I think, can be credited, truly, you should have patented the idea, Nancy, for creating the one city, one read concept where everybody in a whole community reads a book. That's Nancy Pearl. That's the kind of person that we get to hear this evening. And especially right now, connecting people with everything that's going on in our ever-changing world and connecting through literature and just good reading, which is the best thing we can do. And so I want to give my little spiel about Sacramento Public Library. We're thrilled to be doing curbside delivery for you, or curbside pickup for you. And we have some of our mobile services team are out and meeting the needs in some of our neighborhoods, as well as personal shopping by some of our incredibly wonderful librarians. And if you haven't used it and you need something good to read, call or email, and a real live librarian will help you find some great things to read. My favorite titles so far from a librarian recommendation is Thunder Trucks. So if you have a boy under the age of 3 in your life, please check it out of Sacramento Public Library. It's an amazing book, and I would never have discovered it without the help of one of our librarians. So I want to tell you about a couple of other things. 14 libraries are now open for computer appointments. So please take advantage of that. Or if you know someone who does, make sure that they know that the library is once again available for limited access with computer appointments. Now, to the program. A couple of things we want to mention. We're having difficulty with closed captioning tonight. So it will be, we hope, done through an artificial intelligence tool. If not, a transcript of tonight's conversation will be available about 24 hours from tonight. We will have that, and a real live human will go through that. So we apologize as well. It's difficult right now to find people who can do captioning. So it's a problem for us. A few things. Please use the chat box to chat with one another. But the best way to ask a question literally is to click on Ask a Question at the bottom of the screen. We are capturing all of those, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can before Nancy says goodbye at about 2 minutes to 6 tonight. So do that. Please chat in Crowdcast. Your comments are public, so everyone can see them. Our program is also being streamed via Facebook Live, so you can find us at SAC Library on Facebook, at SAC Live on Twitter and Instagram. And again, a recording of tonight will be available on our website probably toward the end of the week. It's Tuesday night. If you haven't read Nancy Pearl's book, you can pick up a signed copy at Face in a Book our official bookseller for this evening's program. So please do that. We also have ebooks, audiobooks, and physical books available through Sacramento Public Library. Now, this is the thing I sometimes forget to do, and I would be remiss if I don't, and that is we want to send all of our love to our friends at HarperCollins who bring us amazing authors, and we are so excited that Nancy Pearl is one of those authors. The other person that we have to really thank is Donna Apidone. She's busy enough. Most of us wake up to her almost every day, and she's an incredibly wonderful voice at Capital Public Radio. Again, another institution that is so special here in the Sacramento area. Donna, thank you for coming back to Authors Uncovered. Nancy, we're so excited that you're here because, you know, librarians love rock stars, and Nancy Pearl is a librarian's rock star. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. People out there in library land, I hope you know where to find the nearest exit, as well as where the closest restrooms are. So please enjoy Donna Apidone interviewing Nancy Pearl. Thank you so much.
Well, Nancy, welcome. It's so nice to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. I've known Rivka for many, many, many years, and I'm a big admirer of her. And several of my students at the University of Washington Information School, former students, work at the Sacramento Public Library. So I'm going to retroactively change their grades unless they ask a question.
Wow, this is a tough room, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I know that you are you would have to be a reader, or you wouldn't do what you've done for a living, and probably a reader from an early age. Did you come from a reading family?
You know, I came from a family first of all, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, in a lower middle class family, and it was a family that was what we would now call dysfunctional. You know, it was a home that I never really felt particularly safe in. So I spent all my time at my local public library, which was the Parkman branch of the Detroit Public Library system. And I would go there every day after school on my trusty bicycle Charger, and I would spend all day Saturday there. Looking back, I was one of those kids that that kind of live at the library and are sometimes the bane of librarians' existence because it's hard to know what to do with them. But there was a librarian at the Parkman Library, a children's librarian named Frances Whitehead. And Miss Whitehead met me when I was about 8 years old, and she gave me the world. She gave me books, and she gave me the direction that I would take in my life. Miss Whitehead, when she met me, all I was reading was horse and dog books, which I think a lot of girls at that age, maybe those girls who live in urban areas and haven't ever seen a horse in real life, read those books. And Donna, if you were to come to Detroit with me today and we went to the Parkman Library, I could still show you on where in the library those horse and dog stories were, because they pulled them out from the fiction section and kept them separate. But Miss Whitehead, really wanted me to read a little more widely. So she would come up to me and she would say, "Nancy, we just got in the new Marguerite Henry horse book. Would you like to be the first person in this library to read that book?" Well, I mean, my golly, to be the first person, how could you ever? Of course. And in the first example of bait and switch that I was ever introduced to, I would hold out my hand to Miss Whitehead for the book, and she would say, "Oh, but wait a minute. Before I give you this book, I'd really like you to read another book like The Borrowers or The Hobbit or Mary Poppins or A Wizard of Earthsea." Miss Whitehead was Canadian. I grew up on a diet of British children's fiction very happily, and turned me into an Anglophile. But that was the kind of person she was. And she really, because of Miss Whitehead, I became a children's librarian. I mean, I when I was 10 years old, I decided that, I was the kind of child who wanted to make the world a better place. And I remember thinking, I want to do for other kids what Miss Whitehead did for me, which was, open up the world and show me there are other ways of being, there are other kinds of families, there's other places to live. All of those things I owe, to Miss Whitehead. And my first job after library school, I went to the University of Michigan. At that time, it was the library school. Now it's the School of Information, SI, School of Information. When I graduated from the University of Michigan library school, my first job after that was back at the Detroit Public Library. And so I wasn't at the Parkman branch. They didn't put me there, which would have been like, oh my gosh, it would be like a dream come true. But I was Miss Whitehead's colleague. And I think that was very meaningful to her. I know how meaningful it was to me. So I was a big reader as a child.
I'm glad I asked that question first because it was such a fabulous answer. But the question may have sounded familiar to you and to anyone who has read this book, because it's the question that you ask just about everybody. You either ask them, were they from a reading family, or you ask another question about reading in their youth.
Yes.
And you have just given me the understanding of why you start with that question, because it unfolds so beautifully and it becomes a life story looking back on books. And who better? Yeah. So tell me about this book. We have 22, did I count right? 22 authors who you...
20, I have to just say, weirdly, it's 23 authors and 22 interviews, because we interviewed Ida Waldman and Michael Chabon together at their home. Yes.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. So I'm glad you did that. 23 authors, 22 interviews. Why did you decide to put this together? You and Jeff co-authored this.
Yes. So let me just go back and just say that we did not go into these interviews with a set list of questions. There were not questions that we asked, that we had written down, that we checked off after we asked each of the authors. The one thing that we did was start with a question that you started with, and usually I would ask it, tell us about you as a child. Were you a reader? And then we would let the writers, the interviewees, just go wherever they wanted to go in the course of a discussion about the books that they loved, the books that meant so much to them. So the way the book came about, the way the Writers' Library came about, is that I met Jeff Schwager, who has become like a little brother to me. He was working on a project for the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and they were honoring 20 Jewish women in the state of Washington, and I was one of those women, which was a great honor. And and Jeff was interviewing all of the women, and then doing a display and a podcast and all of that. So what we discovered very early on in the interview that he did with me was how similar we were in our love of books and reading, and how we just really enjoyed talking to one another about books that had meant a lot to us. And so after that, we started, we would have lunch together every once in a while. And one day Jeff said, Nancy, for a long time, I've had this title in my head, The Writers' Library. And wouldn't it be fun to do a book, a coffee table book, where we go into writers' homes and take pictures of their libraries and then do a little interview? And I said, Jeff, I'm not a coffee table kind of gal. A coffee table book does not interest me at all. What would interest me is interviewing these writers about their relationship with the books they've read, not the books they've written. And we talked to my agent, Victoria Sanders, and she said, no, Nancy, not a coffee table book. That's not your brand. She said, but doing an interview with authors would be.
Definitely your brand. Yeah.
So Jeff and I then had to do the hardest thing, which was come up with the authors.
That would be difficult. And the authors you picked were just perfect. They were the right choices for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that even though you don't ask the same question of anybody past that first question,
Right.
we get all of you in the conversation. You and Jeff and every author you talk to, you're all part of that conversation. It's not an answers only thing.
Right.
You're a very active part of this book. Even though the same questions were not asked, there was a real trend in the answers in terms of the books that really resonated with them. I saw a lot of Robert Yates. I saw a lot of Narnia,
Right.
the Earthsea series that you mentioned, and the green books of children's classics.
Right.
That a lot of people seem to have access to. So there was a lot, those were not isolated cases. There were at least 2, 3, 5 authors who mentioned every one of those as being influential and really meaning something to them at various points in their lives. Were you surprised that there was so much overlap?
Well, I was very surprised at a number of authors who said the Watership Down was the most important books, and for very different reasons. One of the people we interviewed was Madeleine Miller, who of course did those Song of Achilles and Circe, and she has the great classics sort of ingrained in her, and she talked about in the interview reading the last 100 pages of Watership Down and how meaningful that was. I mean, first of all, how she could not stop reading it, but how it's about the best 100 pages in any book that she ever read. But so many of the authors really began with science fiction and fantasy. 2 authors in the book that we interviewed who write very different kinds of books, who are very different people. Charles Johnson, who wrote Middle Passage, National Book Award winning author for that book. Charles Johnson and Jonathan Lethem both talked about how influential Philip K. Dick was in their lives, in their writing lives. So there was the kind of not, the kind of Venn diagram of the writers and what overlaps with them was extremely interesting. 2 of the authors have first editions of The Great Gatsby, that's the book for them.
Yeah.
And
Moby Dick showed up a few times.
Moby Dick and contemporary writers, Laurie Moore, who in my mind is the greatest, who was a fabulous short story writer. She shows up, Tobias Wolff shows up, people, talk about them, but it's the little known books that I was always so happy, or the lesser known books and authors that I was so happy would come up. I remember the first time when I think it was Tom Boyle, who talked about, and we were at his house in Montecito, California, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright house, all open, and he was taking us through when we were looking at his bookshelves, and there was on the shelf was there were many of my favorite books on Tom Boyle's shelves, but there was a copy of a book called The Woman Who Lost Her Soul by Bob Shikoshes, which was the finalist for the Pulitzer Prize several years ago. And it's a big book, and it's a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous novel, but it's a tragic novel, it's a tragic novel, and it's hard to recommend that book to people now, because most of the people that I'm talking to these days want something a little bit lighter to read. So, but Bob Shakoshis's The Woman Who Lost Her Soul is just an amazing book. And Tom Boyle loved it. And Viet Thanh Nguyen, who wrote The Sympathizer, also loved that book. And so those kinds of, books connect us. When you meet somebody who loves the same book that you love, then you're connected. You're connected in a much deeper way than, say, you both. Oh, this is going to annoy movie lovers, but if you love the same movie, I think that there's something about books that, because we no two people ever read the same version of a book,
right? Yeah.
Because everybody brings to the books that they read all of their experiences up to that point. And so, and Paul Oster, great novelist, short story writer, essayist, in one of his essays talks about how when he's writing a novel, he deliberately leaves room for the reader. And he says, and in the end, I believe that piece of fiction is created by the reader and by the writer. And
I'm a person who go ahead.
No. And I think that's so true. That's what makes book clubs so interesting. That
I'm a person who never with my library books, I would never fold a page or write in a library book, I promise. But when I'm going to interview somebody, I have all kinds of little comments in the margins. And I wrote on one page that it was very clear to me pretty early in this book how aware you are of the imprint that every single book that we read, not just the ones we like, not just the ones we talk about, but every single book we read has an imprint on us. And that just the way you talk to these authors and the way you interview them makes that very clear. I also thought it was interesting. There were a couple of questions that you didn't ask, but everybody volunteered information. One of them was revealing inspiration. Yeah. And the other one was what makes a book great. And as far as I could tell, you never really voiced those questions, but at some point or another, everyone told you their inspiration and what they think makes a book great. Were you surprised by that, or did you know that was going to be in there?
They weren't. I was surprised.
Yeah,
I was because it's unclear to me. It's always been unclear to me that you can make a generalization and say, this is a great book. It's a great book for you. The Woman Who Lost Her Soul is a great book for me. The Pulitzer judges deemed it worthy of being one of the final 3 books. But that's all it means. You could read it, Donna, and you could hate it. It's not a great book for you.
Right.
And I think when we talk about the canon, the literary canon, it doesn't mean any. I believe that reading is a joy, that it should be a joyous activity, that you shouldn't slog through a book just because somebody says it's a great book. I mean, if it's a school assignment, read it. If it's, for your book club, you probably should read it too. But if you've picked up a book because it won, the National Book Award and you hate it, that your judgment is as valid as anybody. And 80%, 90% of why we like a book or don't like a book is due to our mood at that moment that we open the book. So if you don't like a book, put it away, stop reading it. And, if you feel compelled, pick it up again later, 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days, I don't know, 6 hours. Our moods change so quickly. And
you can always come back to it and enjoy it later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah.
I have to ask you some questions about you because you've been a part of our lives. You're not just someone who shows up occasionally and does a review. You've been a steady partner for readers for so many years. You certainly have been a steady part of my public radio experience. I think we both got to public radio about the same time. So I've always been aware of your voice and your summer reading. And, so you've been such a big part of our lives, but you're usually talking about someone else. And I want to talk about you a little bit so that we get to know you just a little bit more in a different sort of a way. Do you read books over and over? It was a question you asked a lot of the authors in this book. Would you read the same book over and over? Do you?
I do reread books over again, but I think each time one chooses to reread a book that one loves, it's a toss of the dice. I mean, you're really, in a way, taking your life in your hands, because you don't know what is going to happen. What you're feeling about the book will be at this particular time. And that came up most clearly in an interview with Richard Ford, because we were talking about the book, The Moviegoer by Walker Percy. And I read it when I was 18. About 18, I was very depressed at age 18, and I loved that book. I identified so closely with the main female character, who was also around 18. I think she was in her early 20s, and she was very depressed. And that book was so meaningful to me. And then I reread it, I don't know, 40 years later, and assigned it to a library school class that I was teaching, where we all read a book, the same book, and then had a book discussion about it. So all those students could learn about leading book groups. And I reread The Moviegoer, and it didn't have any meaning for me.
Isn't that something?
I wasn't 18. I wasn't depressed now. And I just felt like I couldn't identify with Kate. I just wanted to sort of reach in and shake her and, sort of shake her and comfort her and say, it'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a risk you take when you reread, but I still do reread. I reread a lot. Yeah.
Do you remember the very first book that you said, whoa, I love this? The dog and horse books, but maybe a little bit further along, something maybe a little bit more philosophical, where you said, books, this is for me.
I think it was the Tolkien books. I think The Hobbit, and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I have my copies. Miss Whitehead gave me copies of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, and the third one. And
the books that you could keep, she gave them to you in that regard? Okay, yeah.
So I still have those copies, which is, pretty wonderful. I mean, those books were so meaningful to me, so important to me, that when I was in college taking linguistics, I wrote a paper for linguistics on the languages that Tolkien invented in The Lord of the Rings. And this is way back in the 60s. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't,
there wasn't the analysis that there is more recently. Yeah.
Right. So, there was that book. Ursula Le Guin's The Wizard of Earthsea was certainly an important book, I think, to me. I read that when I was older, when I was a librarian, because I reviewed that book for School Library Journal. But it was those, there's a series of, I'm not a book collector. The books I have are just books that I love, and I don't care really what condition they're in. I just want them on my shelf. And many of the books that I have are books that I loved as a teenager.
Oh.
And so, I have all of the Betty Cavanagh teenage novels, Rosamond Dujardin, Anne Emery, all the Beanie Malone books. But my favorite novelist, and the novelist that I think really influenced me as a reader, was a novelist, a woman named Mary Stoltz, who wrote books both for kids and for adults, for young adults. And her kids' books, I'm not interested in, but her young adult novels were all written in a kind of stream of consciousness. Now, who writes books for teens in a kind of stream of consciousness? This was back in the 50s. And I still those books, I've collected them from library book sales and, picked them up here and there. And those books were so beautifully written and the characters were so real to me that is why that every book that I love is beautifully written and has really interesting characters to one degree or another in that balance.
Now, I admitted that especially when I'm going to interview someone, that I make some comments in the margin, but even other times, always with a pencil, never with a pen. If I own the book, I'll just make a little bracket around something that I might want to remember or might want to quote or whatever. I understand you are a Post-it note person.
I am a Post-it note. I mean, for no particular reason. I just never got into the habit of underlining in books. One of the benefits of reading on an e-reader is that you can underline.
Right. And drives me nuts.
And you can keep those. And, you can see what you've underlined. I'm a Post-it note sort of gal, I guess. And if you put in a lot of Post-it notes in books, it swells the book. It's sort of like if the book got wet and then, the page.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like twice as thick as it's supposed to be. So you have a lot of those.
Yes. So.
And do you actually go back to what you saved?
I do sometimes, usually with those books, because I do so much public talking about good books to read at various, literacy fundraisers and things like that I always like. And one of the best things when you're talking about a book is to quote a good line from it, to just give people a sense of what the book is.
Yeah.
But Jeanette Winterson, I think the one that won the prize with the most Post-it notes and the most, increase in size was Jeanette Winterson's Why Be Crazy If You Can Be Happy, or I can't remember the full title, but I'm sure somebody can.
Somebody will let us know. Yeah.
Right.
There's a question that I think can be translated into, for any person in any profession, and sort of tailored for the profession. It's the equivalent of the boxers or briefs question. And I think for you, the version of it would be, do you always read the first page first, or do you go to the end of the book?
Well, I am one of those people who I like to know the ends of things before.
I'm not taking you to a hockey game. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, in these basketball finals.
Yeah.
I really want to know what happened at the end of the game so I can prepare myself as I'm watching the game. Yeah. Now, mostly with books, I'm happy to go along with the author and not turn to the last page. Unless something upsetting has happened in the book and I want to see if it all works out at the end.
Oh, interesting.
So then I will turn to the end.
Yeah.
But books for me, I think that I give the author credit for knowing what he or she is going to be doing, and they'll get me to that ending. But I'd like to know how. I mean, I think I'd like to know the end of everything, and so I can, get ready to get there in some ways.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. How do you know? I have way too many books in my home. You must have way too many. How do you decide which books to get rid of?
I get rid of any book that I don't love at that moment. If I love the book at that moment, then I'll keep it. All the books.
And is there a pattern, like once a year, once a month? How often do you review?
I review really every time I walk by a bookcase. I'll sort of say, or even better, every time I dust the bookcases, because that gives me a chance to pull out a book and say, oh, I'm never going to reread this book. but then 9 times out of 10, I'll say, oh, but I really want it. I want it on my bookshelf, just in case, just in case.
Just in case, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it makes it difficult to get rid of them.
It
And of
does.
course, I had really asked that as a question where I wanted your advice because I do have trouble getting rid of them. How does Nancy Pearl do that?
Right.
So yeah.
Difficulty.
Now, because you read so much for a living and have for a lot of your career, what's left for reading for pleasure? How do you separate those two?
I have been very fortunate in carving out a reviewer's life where I only review or talk about books that I enjoy. I decided very early on that I would never give a negative review, especially on the radio. Partly, well, not even just especially on the radio, but for sure on the radio. But in the many talks that I give, there are so many books that I want people to read. I didn't want to waste time saying this is not a good book. Plus, to say this is not a good book is just me saying it wasn't a good book for me. It's not a determinant for someone else.
Right.
And on the radio, on Morning Edition, when it's like, I don't know, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, why would I want to waste some of that valuable time saying, don't read this book, when I could use that same time to say, do read this wonderful book. So I've been very lucky, and I've just sort of chosen that approach, partly because I think it's a celebration of books that I want to do. I'm very, because in all my talk, people always think I love every book, and I'm always afraid they think I have no critical taste. But in fact, I am one of the most critical readers that has ever been. And most of the books that I start, I probably start maybe 15 or 16 books for every book I finish.
Oh, okay.
I'm not even reading books that at that moment I don't like, or I'm not in the mood for.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these, my 10 favorite books of the year are all coming from that early weeding session, where I'm not going to read, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this.
Right. So what we're hearing and I love the fact that you use the word celebration rather, I was thinking recommendation, but you really are celebrating with what you're suggesting that we read. You're reading 20 times that, or at least starting 20 times that. And we really are hearing maybe not your favorites, but the ones that stand out for a reason. Do you think you're a fast reader? How many books do you read in a week?
Well, I am a pretty fast reader. I never took a speed reading class or anything, but I've arranged my life so that basically I don't do anything but read. So I don't garden. For many years I didn't cook. I don't clean. I do nothing. I do nothing but read. It's a pretty great life. Let me
Yes, it is.
You have to have a husband who's willing to go along with that.
Right.
I'm lucky enough that I do.
Yeah. If you were not reading on behalf of the rest of us, if you were not reviewing and recommending and celebrating, if you were just spending all that time reading, is there a genre? Is there a favorite author? What would you go? I don't mean the ones that you read over and over again, but what would be your favorite direction?
So what I always am looking for are character-driven books. I read probably 70% fiction, 30% nonfiction. I majored I have a master's degree in history. Mm-hmm. So I love, I do really like good narrative histories. But I love character-driven novels. And you can tell a book is that it's character-driven if the title of the book is the character's name.
Right.
which is a very easy way to get to a character-driven book. Or if the title is descriptive of the character, like Nick Hornby's About a Boy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always looking for those books. But I also read a lot of thrillers, a lot of mysteries. I've discovered there's this press, a new publishing company called Dean Street Press that does a series of reprints from the 40s, from the 1920s to the 1960s, little known books. And I've just been having a delightful time reading those books, which are all pretty much character driven. They're not all wonderfully written, but they're exactly what I'm in the mood for now.
How do you think, for yourself and from other people you've been talking to in the last 6 months, how has reading changed during the pandemic?
I think for many people, what I've been hearing is that people don't want heavy literature. They don't want depressing books.
On the other hand, we have time. We could.
We do, but I think that, heavy in the sense of an emotionally intense book. I think what a lot of people are looking for is escape. And I have to say, I have always read to escape. That is my modus operandi. From the time I was 8 years old, or even younger probably, I read to escape. And in the Writer's Library, Russell Banks said, he does not read to escape. He reads to enter into. Now, I don't know what the difference is.
Oh, good point.
If there is a difference. But surely there's a difference in the way that you understand it, because I don't read to enter into. I do read to escape.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just disappear inside the book and not have to think about anything that's going on around in the bigger world.
So it sounds like avoidance versus adventure. You're trying to get away from something. He's saying, where can I go?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a very good point. That's a great way of I can see that difference. And that is the kind of books that he reads.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he writes too.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome. I have been in just a handful of libraries in other countries, and I'm fascinated by them because the ones that I've been in a couple of them have been private libraries. So they're massive buildings. They look like old library buildings that we know in this country in terms of the physical location, but they are often collections of one kind or another, history or religion or something. But I don't see as many libraries in some other countries. Is there something that is cultural that we have that's not elsewhere? Or is there something that's going on elsewhere in libraries that the US is missing out on?
I think back to my experience. I've been fortunate enough to do work with the U.S. State Department, the cultural affairs people, who have brought me into various countries to talk about public libraries, to meet with readers. In Bosnia, which was a life-changing experience, they were doing a one book, one Bosnia thing for teenagers. And, Bosnia is this country that is so fractured. It's just heartbreaking to be in that country, because the Serbs are separate from the Muslims are separate from the Croats, who are separate from the Serbs. Even when teenagers are going of different ethnicities, religions, are going to the same school, they don't take the same, they're not mixed together. So there's a wall, and the Serbian teenagers are on one side and the Croat teenagers are on the other side. And this wonderful young cultural affairs person from the US State Department had this idea to get Bosnian teenagers to read the same book and then to bring them together in public libraries to talk about the book, and then to bring kids to Sarajevo to talk about the book. So kids from all over Bosnia came to Sarajevo to discuss. Actually, it was Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Oh my gosh, I know who it is as well as what's his name? The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian.
It'll actually come to you 5 sentences from now. So
Exactly.
yeah, shout it out, whatever you're just interrupt what you're doing when you think of it. How did they choose that book? Do you know?
Well, this young woman, Sunshine.
I guess I'm saying why that book?
Why that book? Well,
yeah.
She just had this insight that she thought it would be a great book because when they called me to invite me to come to do teaching of people about how to lead book groups and everything, they had already chosen the book. When she told me that they had chosen Sherman Alexi's book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, thank you, Karen, for that hint. I thought, what are Bosnian teens? How are they going to relate to this book, which is about a teenager who's a Spokane Indian, lives on a reservation. But it was the absolutely perfect book because everything that this kid is going through, is specific to him, but general to any teenager. And one of the things that is in the book is that the main character, who's 14, makes a list of all the tribes that he belongs to. And he said, he belongs to the Spokane Indian tribe. He belongs to the tribe of comic book makers. He belongs to the tribe of people who play basketball. And so when I was talking to adults in Bosnia, I would say, let's go around the room and everybody say a tribe that they belong to. And the first person who spoke, this woman said, I belong to the tribe of people whose Muslim mothers married Serbian fathers. And somebody from the back of the room said, I'm in that tribe too. And there's that connection. And that connection came from a book. I mean, that's the only reason that they would have to talk about that. So that's the kind of powerful thing. But I was in Cambodia, and Cambodia, as far as I could tell, does not have public libraries the way we understand public libraries. They're more in Phnom Penh, the libraries that I visited were private libraries where people paid to let their children come and I don't even know if they could check out books, but could come to the library to read. I don't know if it's because I don't know if it has to do with democracy, with the sense of democracy. I mean, the libraries have always been a place where newcomers to the country could come and learn about being an American. I mean, that's a very noble thing for a public institution to do. The old DC Public Library used to have on its, on the front of the building, the People's University. And that to me is amazingly wonderful. And that's what a public library can do. I think there has to be a belief in democracy in some ways. I don't know, to see that role for the public library. And I don't even know if we necessarily see that role now for the public library.
What role do you think we see now?
That's a mystery to me. I think we've, in many ways, in some ways, I think we've lost our way. I think
We as readers or people who
No,
run libraries?
People who run libraries. It would be interesting to talk to Rivka about this. But I think that reading, the joy of reading, transmitting the joy of reading is maybe not emphasized in enough libraries the way I would like it to be. Because the library is the only institution, the only public institution that could do that, right? Because that's what the library is.
Yeah. And I have to, just my personal opinion, but I have a feeling maybe one or two people might agree with it. Librarians really are superheroes. I mean, you're the action figure. I can't diminish that. But librarians everywhere are superheroes.
They are. And my being, my having been asked to model this, to be digitized, to be this action figure, I have always seen that I'm standing in for everybody else.
Yeah.
That librarians make the world a better place every single day because of what they do, because of how they help people navigate the world of information, and because they are there to help you find a book that will inform you, enchant you, deepen your knowledge of whatever, and we can deliver empathy in the form of reading. And empathy, I think, is one of the most important things that comes out of reading.
That connection and that tribe.
And yes, exactly. And, we spend so much time, we as human beings, here we are locked in a body. And what do we know? We know what we touch. We know what we see. We know what we hear. But I don't know what you touch. I don't know, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's through books that we leave this body and we enter into the experience of someone else. And the experience that I've always, the experience that I've always felt explains this for me. As I said, I grew up in Detroit, urban Detroit, and what did I know about migrant workers? I knew nothing about migrant workers. There was no strawberry fields that migrant workers came to pick. But Miss Whitehead gave me all of the, she wanted me to read all the Newbery Award books. And she gave me a book by Lois Lenski called Strawberry Girl. And Strawberry Girl, the main character in that book, I believe, I have not read this book for like decades, but I think her name is Birdie. And her parents are migrant workers following the strawberry harvest from Mexico up to the north. And when I read that book, I knew what it was like to be in that situation. That's a way of growing your sense of the importance of other people and what other people are going through. And reading is a way to do that. I mean, I think, I would, I always think it's so important to ask people who are running for office or whatever, if they have a library card. I think, that, I don't want to put people on the spot and say, but, do you have a library card for the city that you live in? I would be very interested.
I guess that's a good point. It says a lot about community. It says a lot about dedication. It says a lot about commitment to education.
Right.
It covers a lot of ground in that one question.
It does.
There was one author who, and it's not so much about the author as it is about you, who said that at a very early age she learned to read some of the Greek classics by learning to read them in Greek. Do you read in any language other than English?
No, so sad. I mean, I think like so many Americans, we're so limited in that. And if you go to another country, you see how many American books are translated and published in those countries. But up until fairly recently, there have been very few books that we got other countries that were translated. Now we're getting a lot more, which is just absolutely wonderful. But it's taken a long time to get there. So,
not to put you on the spot, does anything stand out that we should look? Yeah,
well,
you should read this one because it really tells a lot about another culture.
Well, who's the woman, the Italian woman where we don't really know who she is?
Elena
Ferrante. Right.
Thank you.
Yes. But somebody like that, certainly. But there's a whole publisher, Europa Press, that does all or the majority, I believe, books in other languages that are now available in English for us. And that's great.
Yeah. I just have one more question because I know Rivka's going to come in with some questions from people who are on the stream with us this evening. I just have one more question. What are a couple of books that you've read that you've said, man, I wish I had written that?
Oh my. My favorite writer for many, many, many years was Ann Tyler. And I would have given, if I were writing fiction back then, I would have given almost anything to have written Searching for Caleb, for example, or The Clockwinder by her. But mostly, I don't even think in those terms. I just, because I don't consider myself a writer. I think that, like, we asked that question, was there a book that you wish, to some of the authors in the Writers Library, we said, was there a book you wished that you had written? And Ayelet Waldman, who's Michael Chabon's wife, said that she would have given anything to have been able to write Cavalier and Clay.
Right.
And to me, that just says so much about their marriage, because that's a lovely thing to say, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is a lovely thing to say.
But
yeah.
Also, so I never have thought of myself as a writer so much as a reader. And
what are you reading now?
So
and you're going to come up with like 10 things, I know, because you read so much.
I just finished reading 3 just terrific science fiction, fantasy, whatever, not realistic fiction. And all of these books are probably going to be in the science fiction and fantasy section. But I just loved all of them. And one is called Set My Heart to 5 by Simon Stevenson. One is called Hench, Hench. The author's last name is Walschatz, Walschotts. And I just finished late last night, a book called The Space Between Worlds by a woman named Micaiah Johnson, and they're all just out. They're all pretty much brand new. And they were perfect escapist reading for me, nicely written, just good plots. Set My Heart to 5 has some wonderful funny parts. Hench turns all the kind of tropes about superheroes on their head. It was fabulous. And Space Between Worlds is a great premise. And that's what you need in science fiction, I think, a good premise.
And there's going to be now a very long line at Sacramento Library of people who are going to grab those recommendations from you and put them on their wait list. Nancy, I could spend all day talking to you. It's so interesting, but Rivka's here, so she's going to ask some questions from other people as well. Let's see what they want to know.
Thank you.
I can't hear Rivka, though. I think she might be muted.
Yes, I can see the mute sign.
Yeah, okay. We've all become so well versed in these platforms, and muting was not something most people even knew about a year ago. And now here we are.
Last week, everybody started or 2 weeks ago, talking about AQI. What's
yes, right? Yes, we all know AQI.
I had never thought about AQI.
I think West Coast people have known about AQI more than the rest of the country.
Right.
Yeah.
So
How is the air up there, by the way? While
we had rain the last 3 days, and so
okay.
it's really much. It's
Good.
fine, I would say.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
What about where you are?
It's a lot better. There's still some haze.
37 today.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. We can tell that the sky is supposed to be blue.
Right.
So
Yes.
that's good news. For a while, we were going to do a contest called see if you can draw the sun from memory, because we hadn't seen it for so many weeks.
It was bad. It was
Rivka,
bad.
we can hear you now. Welcome back.
I'm so happy Stephen had to take me out and bring me back in.
That's why we have Stephen.
So here's the problem. So many questions, so little time. So I will try to be as fast as I can. Kathy wants to know, Nancy, you read so many books. How do you keep them straight when doing reader's advisory for different genres?
I have a very good memory for books. I have no memory for anything else. But for some reason, books that mean a lot to me, the names of characters stay in my head, the authors stay in my head, and I'm very lucky that way. But I forget people's birthdays. I forget. I have a terrible memory for everything else. There's a wonderful book, I have to say, where the little girl, it's narrated by a little girl, and she says, "I have a terrible memory. I don't forget anything." And that is like one of my favorite lines.
That's a great line.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I could say what I want to say about great lines in books, because there are so many.
Oh.
So for the book, how did you decide which authors to select?
So that was a hard part, because Jeff loved certain authors that I just wasn't that fond of, and I loved certain authors that Jeff wasn't that fond of. But luckily, in that Venn diagram of authors, that circle in the middle, there were several authors that we both agreed we really, really wanted to interview. And then we negotiated. I mean, I won't say it came to fisticuffs, but voices were raised in some of these discussions. And I remember saying, absolutely not. We're not interviewing that person. I have no interest in that person. And Jeff saying the kind of same thing. I do regret that we only included one poet. She's a wonderful poet, Jane Hirschfield. But I would love to. I wish we had included a few more poets. But
all American writers. Is that correct?
They are all American writers, but it's an America.
Very diverse.
Very diverse. So we, three of the writers are people who came to America as either children or young adults from. And their interviews are fascinating, particularly Layla Lalami, who came from Morocco, talked about growing up in a colonial society, what that meant, and Maza Mengiste, who came from Ethiopia and that was in the midst of a war, and what that meant, and to her, and how that influenced her writing so much. So those were really interesting.
Well, there was a second part to the question, so perhaps that's the answer to the second part. Stephen said, I don't see the common thread that connects them. Maybe it's that they're Americans with diverse stories?
They're Americans who understand America differently, I think.
There you go.
I think there's a big difference in age in this collection. Russell Banks, I think, is 79. He's the oldest one in the group. Madeleine Miller, I believe, is in her 40s. She's the youngest, I believe, in the group. And, they grew up in very different times and had very different experiences in reading and in living.
I love how you're making all these books come alive. Honestly, this is such a great conversation. What are some of your favorite film adaptations?
Oh, so I'm not a big film person for some reason. I think it's because seeing a film, when you're reading a book, for me, I'm creating the film, and I see the characters in particular ways. I think that the Harry Potter books are wonderfully cast. They really are.
Yeah, they are.
They did terrific casting for that. But I'm sad that kids will only know that Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter, and won't have that experience of opening that first book and seeing Harry Potter as they see him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but one of my favorite, this is a very old film. The book is called The Philadelphians, and the film is The Young Philadelphians with a very young Paul Newman and a very young Dig Young. And it was one of the best for me. The book had one too many female characters, and the movie got rid of one of those female characters, which made it a much, tighter, more interesting story. So that's about the best film adaptation.
Great answer. Is there a recent book that comes to mind of celebration?
I saw that on the chat, and I was trying to think of something that would speak to that. I don't, not that I could think of, not that is coming to my mind. All right, I mean, maybe the Writer's Library is that kind of book, because what it's celebrating is reading and writing.
There you go.
We interviewed these writers not about what they wrote, but about what they read, and really it is a celebration of books and reading. So
that's beautiful. Thank you. By the way, I just want to say this: the number one priority for Sacramento Public Library in our strategic plan, and as the next one that we're doing, is reading.
Yeah, we
want a community of readers, and because that's how books just bring us together.
Right.
Sorry. So tell us
she
the
said,
story.
Sipping out of her CapRadio
out of my
mug.
Capital Public Radio mug. Tell us the story behind the action figure. And actually, Lisa says, by the way, my gift from my daughter when I got promoted to to manager.
Oh, that's so nice. So the story behind it is that there's a store in Seattle called Archie McPhee, and they have a wonderful catalog, online catalog, but the store is just great because you could see all these funny different things. And they were doing a series of action figures. And my husband and I were at a dinner party with the owner. I mean, I never go out at all. Like I walk a lot of miles in the morning, and then I stay home and read or whatever, do jigsaw puzzles, which is what I've been doing. But anyway, we were at this dinner party, and Mark, the owner of Archie McPhee, was telling us that people were writing to him about the Jesus action figure and saying that, in fact, the Jesus action figure was performing miracles for them. And I said, but Mark, the people who perform miracles every day, the people who change people's lives every day, are librarians. And someone else said, oh, Mark, you should do a librarian action figure. And someone else said, and Nancy should be the model for it. And then, conversation went on to other things. And we were driving home, my husband and I were driving home, and he said his 4 favorite words to me. Now I know, husbands have many 4 favorite words, but my husband's 4 favorite words to me are, Nancy, think this through. Nancy, think this through. Do you really want to be a 5-inch plastic, non-biodegradable action figure? And I said, oh, don't even worry about it. It'll never happen. And then a year later, it happened. And And the rest, as they say, is
Is
history.
history. Oh, that's such a great story. Thank you.
You
I
know.
love this question from Yvonne. I've tried to introduce some of my favorite childhood books to my kids, and unfortunately, some of them have not held up over
Right,
time, either because of language or
right.
subject matter.
Yep.
What do you think are qualities or themes in children and YA books that have continued to captivate readers across generations?
Yeah, there. The writer in the writer's library who addressed that very same thing is Susan Choi, who tried to interest her kids in the books that she had loved and was dismayed by some of the themes in the books or the way the characters were portrayed. Louise Erdrich talked about that, about the problems of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and why she did not want her children to read those books. Um, I think that I think it could be handled. That's a really hard question because I think that everything's changed for these children, uh, for this generation.
Yeah.
Johnny Tremaine by Esther Forbes is one of the best historical novels about the Revolutionary War ever written. Esther Forbes wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Paul Revere. And when she finished that, she had so many notes that she hadn't been able, so much research she hadn't been able to include, that she wrote a book for teens called Johnny Tremaine that won the Newbery Award.
Yes.
Now, it is, in my experience, virtually impossible to get somebody to read Johnny Tremaine because it is slow moving, because there isn't enough conversation in it. You look at a page of Johnny Tremaine and its sentence, goes from the left margin to the right margin. It's hard to get kids to read that. I'm a big believer in somebody, in parents talking about the way things have changed, and how things that were unfortunately acceptable at one time are no longer acceptable. That being said, I must say that one of my favorite authors is Georgette Hayer, and
Yes.
she is virulently, because everybody was in England at that time, anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And reading those descriptions of, and they're always jewelers and they're always swarthy skinned and have, greasy, and I mean, it's very, very, very painful to read. So I can say, well, that's the way it was at that time. Dorothy Sayer is another writer who has a lot of anti-Semitism running through her books. But I don't know what to do with that.
I know. Because
You know,
again, yes, it's very hard. I feel
yeah,
that way when I read a Georgette Hayer, and
yeah,
yet,
yeah,
well,
yeah, I love her.
so how many books do you read in a year? We have like 1 minute left.
So I don't keep track.
Oh, good for you.
I don't keep track.
And then, are there any particular prize winners like Booker prizes or Nobel Prize, anything that tells you I have to read this
Um,
book?
the Booker Prize, I do pay a lot of attention to. I've been the judge for the Pulitzers a couple of times. I was the chair of the fiction jury in 2017 when Andrew Sean Greer won for his novel Less, which I loved. So I pay attention to that. But I'll tell you what I pay a lot of attention to: the Canadian award winners. There's something about Canadian novelists that
Yes.
that I find that it's hard for me to find a Canadian writer whose books I don't like.
Oh, please tell me you loved 15 Dogs.
I did.
I loved that book so much. And I was the first person to check it out of the library, and it was like 3 years old. And I bought it. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful book, and I love gods and goddesses. So,
I mean, I think that I would love to do a dissertation on, the difference between Canadian. I mean, I feel the same way about Australian fiction, actually.
yeah, yeah.
I love both those. So those are the awards I pay attention to.
That's incredible. I think I think we got through all of the questions, and I wish we had another 3 hours because we could turn this into a slumber party.
That would be
We could have food delivered and we could all just then open it up and talk about books because you're like a shot of vitamin B12.
Oh, thank
Not that I've ever had one, right? It's just it's energizing
Yeah.
to
Let me just say that I know that that there are signed copies available at the bookstore.
yes.
If they run out, or if you would like personalized, I have signed book plates that we're happy to send. If you email me, I put my email up there, admin@nancypearl.com, and just let me know if you want them personalized or whatever, and we will mail them.
Oh.
Yeah, and I just want to say very quickly, I should have said this earlier. A reader of your book does not have to know the authors you talk to, like the authors you talk to. It's the conversation about books that's worth reading, even more than who said what.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
And
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of laughter. There were a lot of laughter. There was laughter in these as we were doing these interviews, and that comes through, I think, in the interview.
It does. It does.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you. I always have to thank the Friends of Sacramento Public Library, who are such great supporters of everything we do here at the library, and they are all readers themselves. So much going on. We actually have another author coming in October, and of course, I have to get back to that document. It's a great title, and it's called. It's Ellis Coase, and he's going to be talking about the short life and curious death of free speech in America 4 or 5 days before the election. So I think it's really good timing, folks. Yeah. So join us on October 28th. Donna, you're amazing.
Nancy, you're a treasure. Thank you.
Nancy, you deserve a new action figure. Well, I know there are even more. And everybody out there online who've participated, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for supporting Sacramento Public Library, and keep reading. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.